Do you enjoy sweeping historical narratives that cover centuries of complex developments while remaining engaging and accessible? Are you interested in understanding the evolution of the Muslim world from its origins in the Arabian Peninsula to its encounters with modernity? If so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing A History of the Muslim World from its Origins to the Dawn of Modernity by Michael Cook. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at yet another book that I feel like taps into my specialty a little bit more. I've said this before, but this year I'm hoping to cover more books that deal a little bit more with what exactly I have a PhD in. I have a PhD in the pre-modern Muslim world, so this very much aligns with my general area of interest. And I am familiar with some of the other books written by Michael Cook. He's a well-known name in the field, and I was fascinated to see that he had written a relatively recent broad history of the Muslim world. This came out last year, I think, or maybe it was the year before. Either way, it's at least in the academic world, still a rather new book. And it is also a massive book. He even says at the very beginning, I do not recommend reading this book straight through. I recommend picking selections of it. And the way he writes is, I found so engaging, but also it is meant to be read in pieces. I will say that if you pick it up like I did and just read straight through, there are times where you may forget exactly what his approach is. And his approach is generally focused on state building. And so he is going to try to ask and answer questions about how different moments in Islamic history led to the creation of various states and exactly how they interacted with the religion or how they interacted with other non-Muslim religions. And so you have a lot of different elements that he is trying to balance. But that also means, if you know anything about the history of the Muslim world, that it is expansive both in geographic and chronology scope. And for that reason, he makes a lot of decisions about exactly what parts he wants to cover and exactly what he wants to say, but he does pick them wisely, and he uses this very powerful narrative approach that I really enjoyed. So it spans from the birth of Islam in the 7th century. It actually does a little bit of pre-Islamic work to give you an idea of the world into which Islam is born. And of course, like I said, it goes to the early modern period, although it's a little vague because he actually has the ending goes clear into modernity, although by no means does he put a major focus on it, but it is something that he wants to touch upon. And the author takes readers through a lot of key historical moments, including, of course, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, also the rapid expansion of Islamic empires, the intellectual and cultural flourishing of the medieval Islamic world, and the political fragmentation that set the stage for the modern transformation that becomes a somewhat defining feature of the Muslim world. The book is actually structured to offer both chronological and thematic perspectives, and so it covers political history as well as religious movements and cultural shifts. And Cook engages with significant questions like, how did Islam emerge and spread so rapidly, as well as what role did religious and political leadership play in shaping Islamic civilization, and how did interactions with other cultures and empires influence the trajectory of the Muslim world? These are the types of questions he's asking to better understand that state development that is the core question of why he is writing this book. One of the book's strengths is its ability to distill vast and often complex histories into a coherent narrative without oversimplifying. Cook strikes a balance between detail and accessibility, making this book a solid resource for both newcomers to Islamic history and to those that have some background but want a well-organized refresher, which would be myself. That is exactly what drew me into this book. Is I knew that, especially based off the size of the book, that there would certainly be details in there that I could use a freshening up on. Despite being an academic, I would say that one of Cook's biggest strengths is his clear and engaging writing style. Academic history books can sometimes feel, we'll say, dry or just a bit inaccessible, but Cook certainly keeps things moving with well-chosen examples and insightful analysis. And he also does a great job of explaining key Islamic concepts in a way that is accessible to readers unfamiliar with them, and it makes this book a very useful introduction to the field. I'd say another highlight of this book and Cook's approach is the historiography. He doesn't just present a single narrative, but he discusses different scholarly interpretations, and he acknowledges debates and gaps in historical knowledge. He very frequently does have to take a step back when he starts out telling you the story of this civilization, that civilization, this sector, whatever, and he's trying to give you some details, and he tells you this narrative, but he does also always acknowledge, yes, but we have to be careful about where we are getting our sources from and just how much we know. I think he does a pretty good job of that. I wouldn't say that that is the purpose of this book, and so if you wanted an actual detailed historiographic approach to any of these main time periods or areas that he's talking about, you're definitely going to have to pick up a different book. But that is the product of a book that is intended to be a survey history. But I'd still say that just his approach certainly makes the book feel more nuanced and definitely intellectually engaging, as it invites readers to think critically about historical narratives rather than just absorbing a list of events. That he does have his list of events, but that is by no means his primary approach. I'd also say that Cook does well in balancing a discussion. Although we're talking about Muslim history, really he is trying to balance religious, political, and cultural history. I think he does a pretty good job at balancing all these major different elements. So religious, political, and cultural, which of course there's a great deal of overlapping, but not entirely overlapping. There's a lot of different approaches. I would say that it's generally an accessible book. However, I would also say with a book of this nature, particularly the scope, there is an advantage, if not a prerequisite, at the very least an advantage, to having some familiarity with some broader world history. I think that if you are hoping to just jump in this and to know the history of the Muslim world by the end of it, I do think that you're probably going to find yourself a little too confused and perplexed if you don't at least have some basic understandings of world history. I think some understanding of medieval European history is going to help you, as well as an understanding of South Asian history and knowing how all of these things are going to interact because of the connective tissue that the larger Muslim world is at this time period. And of course, that also means that there's going to be moments where you are going to wish that Cook lingered a little longer on certain topics because, I mean, it's just so massive in scope. So for example, I mean, he does talk about the Ottomans and the Safavids and the Mughals, but those are also three incredibly important, powerful empires. And so each of them not only can have their own books, they have countless books on each of those three categories. And so the fact that he has to cram all that into, I don't know, it's maybe 100 pages or so, means that you're going to feel that it feels a bit compressed by the time that you finish that, and it may lead you wanting more, which is great actually, and hopefully that is your response, is to go learn more about this subject. I really appreciated that he definitely tried to draw in, I don't want to say just the most obscure elements of the history of the Muslim world, but he did try to address some of the more peripheral elements and to discuss how they interact. He spends a fair amount of time talking about the Iberian Peninsula, not that that's exactly peripheral, but its interaction with the rest of the Muslim world is a bit complicated, even its interaction within itself, and then of course its interaction with the European world. All of those things make it a challenging place to give a straightforward narrative. Yet he does spend a fair amount of time there because he is trying to show you just the complexities of the Muslim world during this time period. And I've said before that that is, of course, my actual specific area of interest. So who is this book for? Well, it's very long, so you have to be up for that or just read parts of it. It is a great introduction to the history of the Muslim world. So if you have any interest in the Muslim world specifically or in world history, I think this should serve you well to pick up. I would say that it would benefit pretty much any history buff that would like to know a little bit more about this material. And again, because it's so big, even if you're a specialist in this field like myself, you're still going to find a lot that you're going to get out of it and enjoy learning. That was certainly my approach. So I think that leaves a lot of people that find themselves fans of history that would be interested in this book. So who is it not for? Well, the length alone is going to be an impediment to most people, but hear me out. You don't have to read it all at once. You are free to only read sections of it at a time. And I do think that will help you get a lot out of it. So if you have any interest whatsoever in history, I think this book could appeal to you. However, if you don't, then maybe it's not for you. But I would also say that even though he's an academic, he writes in a very engaging way that I would certainly recommend that more people that want to know more about history, but that can find books on history a little too boring, I think that this might be a good approach for helping you not just appreciate history a little more, but to specifically appreciate a time and place that you may not be very familiar with. And so I would also recommend that those individuals pick it up. But hey, again, if you don't think you're going to be interested in this time period, if you don't think that you're going to be interested in a history book, if you're looking for something that's maybe a little more fiction based, or on the flip side of that, you're looking for something that's a little more academic and you can get lost in the footnotes, there are plenty of both of those. So feel free to read those instead if you don't think that this one's going to appeal to you. But please let me know in the comments your guys' thoughts on this book. If you've picked it up, or if you're just looking for a history of the pre-modern Muslim world, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. But don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.